Good afternoon. Sunday afternoon about 5:30, and I'm coming off a 4-hour shift of working in a food truck. Let's see, I was peeling potatoes, making quesadillas, and changing money for a friend at a fundraiser. So I had a good afternoon. So I'm more upbeat than usual. Um, and when you're upbeat, what do you need to talk about but sexual predators? So let's go ahead and look at a little section in the book on page 236. In Missouri and most states, there are certain sex crimes in the state statutes that would keep an adult offender on a sexual register after they finish their prison sentence. And we're looking here at identification and surveillance, sometimes for life, most of the time for life. And so you can look on your state websites for your highway patrol or your Department of Corrections and usually locate a map that would indicate even where you live what sex offenders live around you. So the registration follows them. If they move out of state, they're supposed to register anywhere in the state. Sometimes there's restrictions on living close to schools. And so all of these restrictions follow a sex offender pretty much for life. The book brings out an interesting statistic, though, that I've found in investigating sex cases. The book says that 3% of sexual abuse occurs with children from strangers, only 3%. That leaves you 97% that's interfamily or somehow related, somehow the children know. It's a friend of the father, a friend of an older sibling, but it's a known person. And so these identifications out there haven't really stopped, or I haven't really heard of this having much conclusive work towards stopping some of the sex crimes that I deal with, or the majority. So in looking at the cases I work, most of the time they're against girls. A lot of time the boys aren't reporting. We're not getting reports on the boys as often. But on the girls, the parent, a lot of times the mother of the female victim knows the offender, has let him live in the house, knows he's a registered sex offender. That's not something you can hide too well. However, in the sex offenders I've identified and interviewed in the past for criminal justice classes and that I've worked with in the course of being a juvenile officer, they're pretty slick. They have some ability to communicate with these ladies that was a mistake, that was then, this is now, I'd never do that to your children. And they can move from one family to the next until something happens that some other relative points out the fact that a sex offense occurs. I can only think of one time that we actually caught somebody on the first offense. Probably. Most of the time it's repeat, repeat, repeat. And the other thing is, I'm on my second generation of some sex offenders. So some of the guys I've prosecuted in the past, now I'm prosecuting their sons. So not quite old enough to prosecute their grandsons, but maybe in the next 5 years I'll make that too. So that part kind of gets passed along. What I'd like to talk about, though, a little more is juvenile sex offenders. That brings up more of an ethical point. You have a juvenile under 17 years of age who commits a sex offense. Remember, in our world, a sex offense, a charge can be against a 16-year-old having sex with a 14-year-old. And some of these are consensual relationships, and so you still, the parents want this prosecuted. You still have an offense. you still think of it as a victim being involved here, not knowing exactly what's going to happen. Most of the time, those cases are stipulated too that we take in, because you do have eventually a victim who wants to talk about what happened. And when everything's pointed out on statutory rape, you have a victim, and a case is a little clear and easy to make. The issue is making the recommendations of what's going to happen. And what we've done with our court in this jurisdiction is, on the sex offenses, rather than put a juvenile on a registered list for life, which, we're dealing with mushy brain kids. So yes, they did some act that we want to make sure they're accountable for, and we make sure we have them on probation, sometimes send them to juvenile correctional institutions. There's a whole range of things we can do. But the idea of putting them on a register for life, which can happen with certain offenses, is something that I find a little problematic, because it could be a one and only time thing. It could be a very immature 16-year-old, and we get more evaluations of the kid before we'll go to a register for life. So we have a psychiatrist work for us at times on these. Sometimes we have a doctorate level psychologist that does a sexual forensic exam. There's actual tests involved. There's a maturity, IQ, different workups that are done to complete this about 25, 30-page document that tells us about the maturity of the offender, and whether or not he has a propensity, I say he because most of the time it is he, a propensity to reoffend. And based on that is what we use. Is this a pedophile in the making, basically? We use that to determine whether they're going on a sexual offender registry. And so in my jurisdiction, with 100,000 people plus, 3 counties, 100,000 people, I probably deal with 10 to 12 sex offenses, felony sex offenses a year. Let's just look at 30 years of work from me. Maybe it's a few more years than that now, but let's say 30 years. I can only think of 3 juveniles that I've put on the register. So 3 out of 300. And as I look at other juvenile officers across the state, many of them feel that way too. There's one judge north of me, 60 miles north, who every juvenile sex offense goes on the register. Every juvenile sex offender goes into reform school until they're 17 years of age. Judge Martinez has this policy of zero tolerance, no holds barred. All of them go on the register, the adult register, for the rest of their life. She's only one judge out of 56 in the state who seem to do that. So the two that went on the register, I have no problem with that. One kid cut a screen window with a knife, went in at knife point, and raped a little girl. Definitely needed to be on the offender register the rest of his life. The other was a male Hispanic, undocumented male at 16 years of age who convinced a neighbor boy to go into a basement room where he tied him up and sodomized him. So and it is called sodomy in Missouri, so I'm not trying to get biblical on you. But those are the 2 that hit the register for me. So most of the offense, and the other thing about these juvenile sex offenders, I'm here watching this area. Now, of course, some might move away and do it someplace else where I don't know. But, being here and being such a small area, I think I'd be aware if these guys were coming back, is adults doing more offenses, and I don't see that. I really see a one-time thing, and our policy of doing the exams seems to be a very ethical way to look at our juvenile court recommendations, our forensic exams, and I stand by our policy. So that's just one way we look at sexual predators for the juvenile end. And good luck with the rest of your week.